Busy. Not right in the middle of something. Yeah. Schrodinger's cat? No, it's neither here nor there. What? Oh, it's both. Oh. Hey, the blue light's on. I gotta go. I'll have to talk to you later. Howdy. Anyway, this is the 20th installment of The Woman with 1.5 Hands, subtitled The Conclusion of Acceptable Collateral Damage. Here I wrap up my comparisons of some of Emile Durkheim's suicide prevention principles to a few proposed rape prevention principles, and it looks like Durkheim can indeed help us lower American rape rates. Ostensibly, part 21 will be the final video in this series, though later I may amend or put some finer points on any developing issues in a 22nd video. If you're the type to skip to the ending to find out if the hero did in fact rescue the damsel in distress, untied her from the train tracks in time, as it were, I know the feeling. But being here early, I can't say whether or not you're doing yourself a favor. What I can say, though, is that when concluding part 19, I mentioned some things about certain women being willing to integrate with all of their sisters, and not just those of the same station. But instead, many of these women choose something very terrible, which can be compared to choosing a kind of suicide. Yes, it really does come down to women being willing to stand shoulder to shoulder with other women, and calling their bluff, that is, calling the bluffs of their rapacious middle and upper class husbands. Unfortunately, sometimes a whole lot of bluff calling has to happen all at once for the strategy to work, which is not to say it can't be done and or hasn't happened in the past, well, or even in the recent past, to wit, we're supposed to be a nation of laws, one of which is the double jeopardy clause of the Fifth Amendment to our Constitution. A second bite of that apple is not supposed to happen. Can't be tried twice for the same crime, unless the first trial was hung. Point being, if you're found not guilty on all charges in court, that's it. You're free, innocent of those charges, and no more trials for those crimes, is what we're taught. But recently, a throng collectively called that bluff after the first trial of the officers who beat Rodney King were found innocent, and later, when someone filmed a series of videos, he found that he was quoted out of context and people made mashups that made him out to be a jerk. These mashups or edited videos all pointing to the fact that he, this man who made these 21 or 22 YouTube videos, thinks those officers should have done a lot of time behind bars for what they did to Mr. King. 5 years each at least. Hard time, prison, but protective custody, of course. All that, yes, for sure. But they should have been found guilty during the first trial, not forced, unconstitutionally, into being tried a second time. Point being, the most powerful government on the planet was bluffing. And how we know those in charge were bluffing was because after their bluff got called, they responded by saying, "Granted, the United States Constitution is a sacred document, but we're just going to temporarily wipe with it. And then after we're done wiping, it's going to return to a state of being a sacred document." How they wiped is that a second trial was unconstitutionally staged, and it was a foregone conclusion at the beginning, middle, and end of that second trial that those officers would be found guilty of something that would land them behind bars, so that the billion, that's billion with a B as in bluff, so that the $1 billion rioting would stop. In other words, rioting is sometimes a way of calling a bluff. And in certain situations, what's needed is a concerted effort by multiple bluff callers. Take the case of the woman calling the bluff of her middle-class husband. Instead of him continuing to rape her, she instead finds herself not being raped and staying at a shelter. I think it's a great thing for her to no longer find herself being raped whenever this rapist she lives with wants some. What would be great for the cause is for others of her kind to join her at that shelter. Not great for them to be raped, but great for them to finally do something about it. And then what's needed is for a fairly well-off and well-known celebrity to join these middle-class rape victims at that shelter. And not just for a photo op. She needs to live there. She needs to get the ball rolling as far as the good publicity goes. We TV viewers and newspaper readers and fans of the internet need to see smiling, happy rape survivors who are or were middle or upper class and are in pretty cool rape shelters. And they're smiling and laughing because they're no longer being raped. Right now we need just one, and we need massive coverage of this star in her new environment. I'm sure all it would take is one. Quickly, others would join her. At first, it would be a trickle. Soon, if enough money donated to rape shelters went to publicity, that trickle would become a stream. Who knows, someday there might be a river of women from all sides of the tracks who are tired of being raped. And with their middle and upper class rapists/husbands in prison, rape rates will go down, and not just a little bit. And that's right, one. All it takes is one. Proof? You want some proof that all it takes is one? Okay, here goes. There currently is an activity engaged in by tens if not scores of millions of American women that started with one woman tossing out that idea to a friend. Keys were invented hundreds of years ago, but it wasn't that long ago, the 70s or maybe the late 60s, when that first key-born accusation was issued to that first low-income man. I first heard about key shaking in the early 80s, and in the weeks immediately thereafter noticed how widespread it had already grown. For this saber-rattling to be that prevalent at that time, I figure it must have been around for a few years before it came to my attention. After extensive research, I can't narrow it down any more than sometime shortly before the early 80s. As always, your input is very welcome. Right down there in the comment section. Excuse me. Oops, jumping ahead there. So it can be done. A signaling system can be devised. Excuse me, another signaling system can be devised. It's up to those of us who really want to end rape to start up another system, one that recognizes teammates rather than picks fights. I just think of a bunny. What does a bunny rabbit do? It wiggles its nose. It doesn't want to be murdered. It wouldn't mind having another teammate to help in the struggle against being murdered. Think of its wiggling pink nose. And think of you being out there in this wild jungle. And sometimes you're not carrying a gun. Sometimes you're not surrounded by your posse, your bodyguards. But if out in public, around potential murderers and potential teammates, you should always be wearing pants, I figure. Or a dress or a skirt or shorts. Tugging at a belt loop? Could that be the signal? That could be mistaken for just pulling up your pants. In which case, I'm back to the wiggling nose. I've thought about this a lot. Imagine that. And I think a light tapping on the end of one's nose with an index finger could be the new signal. To illustrate, say you're an adult male, just grabbing a cup of coffee. You're married, somewhat happily enough that if you want a cup of coffee, you find yourself at a Starbucks, and you're there for the coffee, not for a fling. So you make eye contact with another customer, a woman, and she's heard about a new signaling system, a way that actually prevents rape. She taps her nose, you tap your nose, but that's it. No conversation. It's not necessary. No guiding her elbow like she needs help finding the front of the line or the door. It's just a few quick taps on the nose, and then, if you're that male, you're done. If, on the other hand, she initiates conversation, fine. Exchange a few words. The point is, it's about ending rape. It's not about picking up chicks. It's not about hooking up. And concerning those men who wear Susan G. Komen breast cancer awareness shirts just to show women that they care just for hooking up purposes, i.e. to get dates or digits, guys like that really take the cake. I sincerely hope that overly aggressive men don't perpetuate unwanted sexual attention toward women by first tapping their noses or whatever signal ends up being the new way to prevent rape. If it's unwanted or it gets out of hand, my suggestion to these women is carry a concealed weapons permit in your purse, right next to your handgun or stun gun. Maintain your distance, head for the restroom, redirect the conversation to include nearby employees, and if all else fails, put your hand in your purse and prepare to defend yourself. Some guy who's clued in should get it. You're just there for coffee. He tapped his nose, you tapped your nose, but then you're done. Yeah, it's great to meet a kindred soul, but that still doesn't necessarily mean that you want a prolonged conversation with a teammate that you just met for the first time 2 seconds ago. And you didn't even really meet. He might think the two of you are meeting, but you're just there for the coffee. I mean, my God. Put simply, if some undesirable, that is, in her estimation of him, he's undesirable, if some guy like that stumbles into a coffee shop and he's cognizant of nose tapping, he also knows that he doesn't get to talk, and that in exchange, a female nose tapper is not going to accuse him of being a rapist by shaking her keys at him. True teammates tap noses, that's it. A woman who's unable to see if a man is tapping his nose, say she's visually impaired, can occasionally announce, "I'm tapping my nose." If she's blind and deaf, she could wear a sign that refers to a digital tap of her rhinological appendage. Which sounds great on the one hand, but on the other hand, signs can be misapprehended. A traffic sign on the interstate, for instance, might say maximum speed, 70 miles an hour, but it can be understood or misunderstood to mean it's okay to travel at 78 or 79 miles an hour. Here's where most Americans, myself included, have conducted plenty of in situ field research. We traveled on freeways at speeds exceeding the posted limit. And what happened? Almost every time we didn't get pulled over, even if speeding right in front of a cop, who wasn't busy giving someone else a ticket. And we clearly were going 2 or 3 or 7 miles an hour faster than what it said on the sign. Sure, it's possible that traffic officer would have loved to write you a ticket. But, unbeknownst to you, that cop had mechanical trouble with his prowler and was waiting for a tow. And he couldn't very well sit there with his hood up, because that might be seen as an invitation to an attack. Yes, the above is possible, but what's more likely is that there's a known back and forth between what's posted and what's allowed. We know that they know that we all know what's going on. Do vigilantes go around chastising or attempting citizens' arrests on speeders who are doing 1 mile an hour over the speed limit? No. It's all pretty much accepted and expected behavior. Other than school zones and a paltry number of other exceptions, to travel on our roads at about 10% faster than the posted limit does not receive a second thought from cops nor from most civilians. Where it can get tricky, however, is in the courtroom. If part of your testimony is that you were traveling 72 in a 70, and you're trying to sue our government for damages, among them a passenger's death, after your collision with a too-high guardrail that, because of its height, may or may not have contributed to her injuries, expect to lose that case, like a local woman did. Yes, after the conclusion of that trial, highway crews did adjust the height of that guardrail. It arguably was a contributing cause, if not the major cause, of this traffic fatality. That said, the state still won this case, in part because the plaintiff admitted to speeding, and, well, it's not like that guardrail was in her lane, it being moored on the other side of the fog line. So, depending upon what kind of push comes to what kind of shove, sometimes 70 means 70, but sometimes it can mean 78 or 79. How this relates to our topic is that a while back a woman ran an idea up a flagpole and her friend saluted it. Soon, millions of American women had also accepted this idea, and they can be found shaking their keys at low-income men at places like Walmart, but not even holding their keys, let alone shaking them, at places where men of means are known to congregate, like Arrowhead Stadium. When this idea was first floated, shakes of keys were to be directed at rapists, which is to say, key shaking started off having to do with 70 miles an hour, or being all about announcing to men that a nearby key-shaking woman would attempt to fight off a rapist, the logic behind that being that a rapist, supposedly, would rather rape an easier-to-rape victim. And the signal, the sign that represented or symbolized that a fight was to be in a rapist's future if he tried anything, was those keys, and the high-pitched metallic clanking sound they made, reminiscent of the steel of sharp blades. Good intentions, i.e. 70 miles an hour, came and went. Soon, though, that signal had come to represent something different than what the original framers had intended. And now, almost every woman in almost every situation where low-income men are near her is doing the 78 or 79 thing with her keys. She's no longer doing the anti-rape thing with her keys. She's doing the "you're a low-income dude" thing with her keys. The question then becomes, does that cop know that you're doing 78 and a 70? It kind of seemed to him like you were speeding, so he looked at the display of his radar gun. And sure enough, 78. For a cop to act like he doesn't know that 70 has come to mean 78 is for him to be attempting to pull the wool over your eyes, because he can't be that uninformed and still be uniformed. He's joking or lying or doing something fishy, and no doubt has a good reason to do so, but he knows that 78 is accepted, even though it's posted 70. The thing is, though, this officer also noticed that more than half the vehicles on the road that fine spring day were besting 71. It's not night, and it's neither raining nor snowing, and it's nowhere near a road construction site. Why all the fuss? Put simply, we expect as much. The weird thing is getting pulled over for doing 71 and a 70 on a fine spring day when it's daylight and the conditions are great and you don't have a broken taillight, etc., etc., etc. Bottom line, it's all about the back and forth. It's about expectations and about certain folks consistently behaving the same way. I consistently travel slower than 10% faster than the posted limit, and cops consistently refrain from pulling me over. Yes, there's a mutual acknowledgement here, but it's more than that. We civilians know that what we're taking part in is a back and forth that involves more than us and one rookie cop who can't tell the difference between 78 and 70. Rather, we're dealing with dozens or hundreds of cops that we've personally seen looking back at us while we were doing, say, 75 or 78 in a 70. And then, no tickets. It's not random, and it's not the same bumbling cop that we've seen those dozens or hundreds of times. In short, I'm referring to what's known as an institutional arrangement. When new roads are added to the grid, road crews and/or civil engineers first test them, and if a speed of 55 in a particular area seems about right to them, the signs will say 45. 55 seems cool, the signs say 45, followed by the opening of that road, and then many of us doing more than 50 on that stretch of road, but not very many of us exceeding, say, 60. What I'm trying to say is that our government, in its wisdom, plans for this back and forth arrangement to continue happening. Transportation officials anticipate future behavior to match, or approximately match, past behavior. And if they get it wrong, they spend the money to repaint the traffic signs. They don't just let the body count continue to climb. Other government officials, say those in the public health arena, also proceed through various stages of back and forth, anticipation, and readjustment. If the CDC, for instance, notices a sexually transmitted disease spiking, they usually don't just let the body count continue to climb. I'm wrapping air quotes around body count here, even though many of these diseases aren't fatal. That said, they can be mighty encumbering and easily preventable. If the probable cause of a spike has been narrowed down to misinformation. In other words, no new research will be necessary, and it should be an inexpensive fix. And especially if, seemingly overnight, hundreds of thousands of Americans are missing work, pronounced paying fewer taxes, due to this disease. And if the zombie apocalypse isn't simultaneously occurring, I think we're going to hear about it. In other words, I think the CDC is going to send out a memo. Well, in fact, they have. Very shortly after the introduction and widespread use of the birth control pill, for instance, health officials noticed a considerable increase not in births, but in sexually transmitted diseases. And after interviewing thousands of women, they discovered something curious about a good chunk, not quite half, of women between the ages of 18 and 30 who were taking birth control and were engaging in sex with multiple partners and at higher reported rates than their 20th century predecessors had reported engaging in before the invention of the pill. And what was this curiosity? They said they didn't sit on public toilet seats. When further prodded, their number one reason for hovering was to avoid contracting a disease that is almost exclusively contracted through, you guessed it, sexual intercourse. So did the CDC just let this toilet-oriented body count continue to climb? I mean, the above clearly indicates a case of misinformation, akin to someone who subscribes to Lightning magazine and, though not struck yet, is worried sick about being struck by lightning twice in the same year, and just happens to spray water on women working on power lines while not wearing rubber boots and while standing on a metal ladder that's leaning up against a substation they're repairing. I think my point's been made. Not that it's not possible to get hit by two different bolts. And yes, a toilet seat could be the source of your undoing, but still, anyway, as noted above, the CDC usually sends out the message in such cases. They often talk to an Associated Press reporter. They're known for adding links to their homepage. And if you're taking sex ed at your local public school, you're probably going to hear about the most popular toilet seat disease spreader of your day. And in a way, that's an attempt to more healthfully construe what's been misconstrued. Probably. Usually. Sometimes, though, our public health officials fall down on the job. They notice a problem. It's widespread, growing, epidemic, easily preventable, and it shouldn't take that many tax dollars to sound the alarm, and, with any luck at all, reverse the trend. So far, so good. This throat. So far, so good. Sometimes, though, what happens is that the trend isn't reversed. Whatever the CDC did, and they did do something, didn't help. Body count still climbing. Signs got painted 70 mph. Accidents galore. Signs not getting repainted. Funds from the CDC went to Jaden and Tone. Stats got gathered. Some of these stats good, some fair. Oh my God. I am sorry about that. Believe me, I don't want to have to do this over again. Ay. Oh. Funds from the CDC went to Jaden and Tone. Stats got gathered. Some of these stats good, some fair. Or maybe I'll have to learn how to edit. Actually, I think it's kind of cool, though, this whole thing about how I do all of these completely in one take, no editing at all. That way, people will know out there, if they ever see any editing in any of these 21 or 22 videos, they're going to know I didn't do it. Funds from the CDC went to Jaden and Tone. Stats got gathered. Some of these stats good, some fair. But then in their presentation of their stats, in their analysis included with their stats, the myths were not demystified. The myths were not debunked. And as a result, many women have been raped since, and due at least in part to the continued perpetuation of these myths as if they were truths. Followed by the CDC neither doing their own follow-up report nor funding anyone else to do a follow-up report. Now, by my saying something negative about the CDC, am I saying that I think they invented or synthesized a particular disease and that they should be blamed for its synthesis or development? Of course not. What I am doing, however, is asking YouTubers to take a second look at their name. The Centers for Disease Control and Prevention. I'm not saying CDC officials have gone around with hypodermic needles spreading diseases. What I am saying is that according to their name, one would think they're supposed to at least try to prevent the spread of diseases. And if they know enough and are concerned enough about a public health issue to fund the research of people like Jaden and Tone, how can they not know about ways that I've discussed in this project that would drastically reduce the spreading of this same health concern? My point? I think they can't not know, which is why I think it's unconscionable that they continue to sit on their thumbs. I'm not that smart. I can't be the first to take the dots that Jaden and Tone connected and connect them in a different way, a way that's equally logical, nay, it's more logical than their method. And the dots that I reconnected in parts 4 through 9 of this series are not alone. Here's a couple more. About 2/3 of all rapes occur between 6 p.m. and 6 a.m., and about 3/4 of them take place in private places, like a woman's home or her boyfriend's home. So, should women be afraid of the dark or of staying home? Or is that how we should interpret these stats? How about this? Where is a woman most likely to be after dark, and or if she's at a private place? Maybe at home? And who else is likely to be there, if anyone? Her husband or boyfriend? If you're smart enough to teach a women's studies class at a university, you're smart enough to see who's getting keys shaken at them and who's not. You should also be smart enough to know that almost to the woman, what doesn't happen is for a woman to first shake her keys at a man and then later go out with him. The kind of man who gets keys shaken at him is not the kind these key shakers date. In at least 76% of all cases where a woman does get raped, what is the go-to stat? Did you date him? Is he your husband? Is he your boyfriend? Did he used to be your boyfriend or husband? Personal opinion. I think it's naive to just accept this 76% figure as right on or close enough, when it's probably quite low, as there are many rape victims who can't help it that they ended up at the hospital, too beaten up to stop friends from dragging them there, for example. But what they can help is not killing the goose that's laying those golden eggs, i.e. their financially well-off and rapacious husband. So they say a stranger raped them, or some guy at a bar. Granted, the CDC is not purposefully infecting millions of people with diseases, but they are avoiding paying for a much-needed rebuttal to the myth-spreading machinations of Jaden and Tone, a rebuttal that would slash American rape rates. Similarly, women's studies professors and others within the anti-rape industrial complex, or TARICO, are not raping anyone, but due to their inaction and or willful ignorance and or them allegedly not being able to see something that's staring them in the face, they are giving water, sustenance, and sunlight to the rape plants. To repeat, TARICO is not raping anyone. Rapists do all the raping. TARICO is, however, twisting their stats around so that more women end up getting raped. TARICO isn't Madison Avenue. TARICO doesn't drive women to try to marry up in class. TARICO doesn't try to talk women into keeping up with the Joneses. It's probable that a director with TARICO affiliations did not direct the movie The Alarmist, which portrayed a burglar alarm salesman pitching his product to a female customer with this gem, quote, 60% of all rapes are committed by burglars, end quote. In that movie, that stat is self-serving misinformation. In real life, that stat, and many others like it, ends up becoming part of the misinformation stream that, much like toilet seat disease spreading, still nonetheless seeps into our collective consciousness. Now, TARICO pros are not responsible for everything in our culture that makes rape more likely. However, these pros are in positions of leadership. They have control over the ears and eyes of millions of college women, which means their message eventually reaches scores of millions of American women, and these TARICO leaders stand by idly and watch as women are being fed down the chutes toward their demise. And by not sounding the alarm, by resigning these women to a supposedly unavoidable fate, they are contributing to these rapes. Durkheim said that the following was either a coincidence or that the one caused the other. He said that the fall of the guild class, coupled with the Industrial Revolution, is what caused suicide to triple in the 19th century. Or it could all have been happenstance. Can't be confirmed in the lab, Durkheim wrote. I might be wrong. Headlines in his day asked, is suicide the ransom money of progress? Today, if enough of his principles are indeed transferable, and I think they are, one might ask a similar question. Why are leaders within the anti-rape industrial complex remaining silent about the myths I've touched on in this series, and are thereby acting as though it's preferable for more women to be raped than it is to question the major drivers within our society that propel them toward their rapes? Why indeed are these TARICO leaders remaining silent? Is it because these leaders are protecting, whether they admit it or not, the status quo? And is the status quo hinged on the wives of middle and upper class men simply needing to continue performing their wifely duties, even when they're not in the mood? Would our whole structure collapse if these women started calling their bluffs? You know, if y'all called their bluffs, you might not have to put up with being a prisoner in your own bedroom. You, out there in YouTube land, you middle and upper class women who have been raped by your husband's boyfriends, you who are the victims of the least reported style of rape, how do you like being treated by the anti-rape industrial complex as if your rape were acceptable collateral damage? I'll slather some icing onto this cake in my next video, which will be subtitled Part 21, or Conclusion.